Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We have such a great crowd here on the pavilion and online as well. Good morning, everybody. I see you. I do want to make sure that you know wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome and wanted here today and every day.
Good morning, everyone. If you've looked at this week's bulletin, you're seeing a lot of items focused on a person by the name of Rich Mullins, who you may or may not be familiar with, depending on your background. Rich was a Christian musician from the late 80s and the 90s, and he died in a horrific traffic accident 25 years ago this past week. Now, I don't really listen to Christian music anymore, but I still listen to Rich. In the 80s and the 90s, Christian music was as shallow as a mud puddle. But Rich Mullins was very different. He was a poet who challenged his listeners to embody the call of the gospel through compassion and grace, mercy and justice. And not only through his music, but also through his life. He really eschewed the idea of celebrity at a time when Christian music was really sort of focusing on the power and the influence of celebrity. And to the point where he ended up moving to the Navajo Nation, where he lived in like a yurt with a friend of his. Many people thought he was his partner. And they taught music there. And he said at one point, quote, "I think I just got tired of a white evangelical middle-class perspective on God, and I thought I would have more luck finding Christ among the quote-unquote pagan Navajos." And while I don't necessarily vibe with Rich's theology, which was still very much steeped in atonement, the blood of Christ and whatnot, I like to think that if he had lived, if he was alive today, that we would have seen him evolve theologically, because he was really never someone who remained static in his ideology, and that is reflected in his body of work. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people really only remember Rich from his really massive hit, Awesome God, which is used still today in churches as a worship song. And it's a fine song, but it's a tragedy because his canon, his work, his oeuvre, whatever you want to call it, is brimming with work that dives deep into what it means to be human, the nature of the divine, and the struggle to remain gentle in a hard world, which is the topic of our conversation today. Now, why am I going on and on about Rich? Well, he was very influential on me. I found his work to be very powerful and still do. So since it's been 25 years since his death, I thought I would honor his memory by including in our gathering today some of his music, some of his lyrics, and even a tribute from Christian writer and activist Shane Claiborne that was posted online this week, and that is in the bulletin for you to read if you want. If you know who Rich Mullins was, I hope this is a reminder of his legacy. And if you don't know who he was, I would really encourage you to check out his work. It's really, really good. And with that, today's moment of focus is from the Rich Mullins song, "Peace, a Communion Blessing from St. Joseph's Square." Though we are strangers, still I love you. I love you more than your mask. And you have to trust this to be true. And I know that's much to ask. But lay down your fears. Come and join this feast. He has called us here, you and me. And though I love you, still we're strangers, prisoners in these lonely hearts. And though our blindness separates us, still a light shines in the dark. Welcome, and we're going to kick things off with a Rich Mullins song, "Hold Me, Jesus."
Oh, sometimes my life just don't make sense at all. When the mountains look so big and my faith just seems so small. So hold me, Jesus, 'cause I'm shaking like a leaf. You have been my King of glory. Won't you be my Prince of Peace? And I wake up in the night and feel the dark. It's so hard inside my soul. I swear there must be blisters on my heart. So hold me, Jesus, 'cause I'm shaking like a leaf. You have been my King of glory. Won't you be my Prince of Peace? Surrender don't come natural to me. I'd rather fight you for something I don't really want than to take what you get out of me. And I beat my head against so many walls. Now I'm falling down, falling on my knees. And the Salvation Army bands playing this hymn, and your grace rings out so deep, it makes my resistance seem so thin. So hold me, Jesus, 'cause I'm shaking like a leaf. You have been my King of glory. Won't you be my Prince of Peace? I'm singing, hold me, Jesus, 'cause I'm shaking like a leaf. You have been my King of glory. Won't you be my Prince of Peace? You have been my King of glory. Won't you be my Prince of Peace?
Today's scripture passage is from Genesis chapter 2, verse 25 through chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. Now the woman and the man were both naked, though they were not ashamed. But the snake was even more naked, the most cunning of all the animals that Yahweh had made. Quick little note here. The Hebrew cunning here means smooth, like smooth operator. The snake asked the woman, "Did God really tell you not to eat from the trees in the garden?" The woman answered the snake, "We may eat fruit from all the other trees in the garden, but of the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, don't eat it and don't touch it, or you will die." The snake said to the woman, "Die? You won't die. God knows well that on the day that you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods, knowing good and evil." The woman knew that the tree was enticing to the eye and now saw that the fruit was good to eat, that it was desirable for the knowledge it could give. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. She gave some also to the man beside her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. When they heard the sound of Yahweh walking in the garden in the cool of the evening, the man and the woman hid from Yahweh's presence among the trees of the garden. Yahweh called to the man, "Where are you?" "I heard you walking in the garden," replied the man. "I was afraid because I was naked and I hid." "Who told you of nakedness? Have you eaten from the tree whose fruit I forbade you to eat?" The man replied, "It was the woman you put beside me. She gave me the fruit and I ate it." Typical. So I was going to conclude our talk on prayer this week, but throughout the week, I've had several conversations which somewhat prompted me to move in a different direction for today. And we'll definitely come back to the prayer thing, I promise. But I felt compelled to talk today about how it is that we stay human in an effed up world. How do we move through the darker seasons of our lives without losing hope, without becoming callous or cruel? How do we see beauty emerge from the ashes of our trauma? How do we reconnect to what is beautiful and joyful in life when perhaps life has not been particularly beautiful or joyful? How do we resurrect out of despair? And I want to get to those questions through something that happened to me a few years ago when I was in the midst of the ordination process. And when you enter the ordination process for the UCC, you are assigned a mentor or an advisor, another clergy person who has been working in the field for a while. And you spend time with them. Long chat. I'm sure, Donna, you've probably been a mentor and advisor, so you know. And you spend time with them. Long chats over discussions around theology and politics and philosophy and all sorts of good stuff. And at one point, my advisor asked me, what is your favorite call story from Scripture? As in, what's your favorite story from Scripture where a character was being called to something more, something greater? And my immediate response, without hesitation, because I had thought about this, was Eve. Now, as an academic at heart, my love for Eve as a literary character and as a spiritual metaphor is strong. Not only did Eve desire more knowledge, which I can relate to and appreciate, but she also resisted the dominant systems that sought to dictate her agency. I mean, if the story of Eve isn't a biblical story of the fight for equality against systems that seek to control and dominate, then I don't know what would qualify. And this biblical figure is particularly pertinent as we see women in Iran fighting and dying for their right to maintain their own agency. Even Eve is pertinent as we watch forces that seek to end abortion rights and access in our own country. And within Jewish traditions, Eve was even a part of a line of resistors, starting with her prototype in the character of Lilith, whose story is found in the ancient Jewish midrash of the alphabet of Ben Sirach. Lilith, in Judaic mythology, was the first wife of Adam. He couldn't hold a woman any better than I can. So she viewed herself on equal footing to that of her husband. And consequently, she refused to take the submissive role during sex. And this ticked off both God and Adam. So Lilith fled Eden. The story goes on to suggest that Lilith copulated with demons and gave birth to she-demons who killed men by absorbing their life force, which is a none too subtle attempt by the patriarchy of that time to demonize the idea of a woman operating apart from or expressing dominance over a male-centered world. You guys remember Lilith Fair? Do they still do that? That's what Lilith Fair is named after, the figure of Lilith. Lilith even appears in the book of Isaiah as a kind of vampiric night creature. But despite this attempt to demonize the idea of the independent woman, what we also see with Lilith and Eve, who are in essence the same archetype, what we see is a subtext that paints a picture of women who claim their sexual as well as their intellectual agency. And so it's not difficult to see why they both have been demonized by dominant male systems for millennia. And while my advisor wasn't exactly crazy about this answer, it's an important setup for what I want to talk about today, about how we might remain human in an effed up world. Now, within the Genesis story, before Eve and Adam encounter the serpent, and let me just stop right there. Real quick, let me ask you this question. Who is the serpent? In most Christian traditions, the snake of Genesis is equated with the devil or Satan. That's sort of traditional Orthodox teaching. But not only is there no indication of this within the narrative, it doesn't say Satan or the devil came in the guise of a serpent. It doesn't say that. It's also important to remember that this is not a Christian narrative. It's a Jewish story, and there was no concept of the devil in ancient Israel's worldview. Now, Satan appears in the Hebrew Bible, but it's Satan the accuser who is literally working for Yahweh. He's an angel. So there was no demonic devil that eventually evolved into Satan within the New Testament. Because in Jewish tradition, there was no need for a devil. God encompassed within Jewish tradition both good and evil. Which brings up all sorts of fun theological rabbit holes to travel down. If you're interested in this, read the book of Job, where Job basically gets laid waste by God, and he asks God, "Why did you do this?" And he goes, "Isn't God?" That's literally what happens in Job. But those conversations are for another day. But the original intent of the literary representation of the serpent within Genesis was not the devil. So before Adam and Eve encountered the snake, within the story, they seem to have no reason to really consider eating the forbidden fruit. They were, as the text points out, created good. And everything seems to be at peace. No reason to question, no reason to doubt. God is good, the world is good, they are good, the creatures are good, it's all good. But then along comes the serpent. Remember, just a creature. So also created good, which is very important. And what happens? Well, the snake throws a monkey wrench into the workings of everything that Eve and Adam understood about their world. Because up to this point, Eve and Adam had no reason to question Yahweh. But now they seem faced with some difficult and glaring questions and contradictions. Now I'm paraphrasing here, but the serpent says, "Did God tell you that if you eat of the tree, you will die?" That's just not true. God knows you will be awakened by that tree. You will know good and evil, but you certainly will not die. Now, here's what I want to get to today and why I'm using this particular story with this amount of background. Have you ever experienced a moment or series of moments where what you previously thought of the world changed in almost an instant? Or maybe had an experience where someone you know or someone you love suddenly seems to be a different person than who you thought they were up to that point. Or maybe some deeply held belief, something that you've rooted your identity in, is suddenly exposed as false. If you have, my guess is that you experience some level of fear or anxiety or frustration, and that you might be able to relate to Eve and Adam. The serpent's revelation in today's passage changes everything for them, and their world is forever altered. They must have been wondering, did God lie to them? Telling them that they'd die if they ate from the tree? What does it mean if God lies? Why would God lie? Is God not who they thought? And perhaps feeling betrayed by the story that had shaped their life, perhaps feeling a sense of fear and anxiety by the existential rug that had just been pulled out from underneath her, Eve wants to know the whole truth. Who wouldn't? The desire to know more and to know more deeply, especially in the face of a startling new reality, is not a bad thing. It is not a sin. Like I said, from my perspective, it's a credit to Eve, and this is a story that can be read in a very positive light. This last week was Banned Books Week, which is an important reminder that there are a whole bunch of people in our world who fear knowledge, who fear questions. Questions are good. Pursuit of knowledge is good. Feeling betrayed and fearful when a new truth is unveiled is understandable and shouldn't be feared. And we can read this moment with Eve as a difficult, but a very relatable one when we approach it through the lens of anxiety. When our understanding of the world and our understanding of self is in question, where do we turn? Or a better question still is, in our times of fear and anxiety, what do we turn away from? In other words, can we keep trusting the divine spirit while also pursuing these sometimes difficult truths about God, about ourselves, and about others? Can we continue to trust even when we might have legitimate reasons not to? And these are not simple questions with tidy answers. I'm not going to give you answers today because I don't have those answers. It's something we all have to work with. And then the next thing that happens within this story, or doesn't happen, is important. Neither Eve nor Adam, this is very crucial, neither Eve nor Adam took their questions to God. They don't trust at this moment that Yahweh will be honest with them or even have their best interest at heart. So they pursue knowledge outside of their relationship with the divine, outside of the community that they were a part of. And while pursuing knowledge and truth holds the potential to radically change our worldviews and our ideologies, and make no mistake, again, I hold this as a value. But we must never forget that as we grow in knowledge, good knowledge and bad knowledge, our growing awareness of life's complexities hold the potential to cause us fear and anxiety and despair and even distrust. And so perhaps the story isn't about God's fear of her creation gaining knowledge. Knowledge is growth, and the pursuit of knowledge and the love of truth is part of what it means to be human. But maybe the story is about what might happen when we pursue knowledge apart from the divine spirit, apart from community. And when we accrue knowledge without the guidance of compassion and the love and justice that helps us to not only make sense of that knowledge, but to be able to put it to use for collective flourishing, we might find ourselves overwhelmed by the despair and hopelessness that can sometimes come from knowing what we know. For example, gaining knowledge of our white privilege and our roles in cultural white supremacy awakens us to our own ability to do harm to others. And for some, rather than this being a moment of revelation that propels them into a conversation with the community around them, it can often create a sense of despair or anger or even just outright denial. Or some of us have been driven by fear when we become aware of our own vulnerabilities and the hard truths of the harms that have maybe been done to us. Done to us by those we are closest to. Done to us by those we once thought of in a certain way, but through a gaining of knowledge, we now view them very differently. Or perhaps even done to us by strangers, or even done to us by our own churches. When we hold our stories of, say, sexual assault, or unloving parents, or lovers that left, or professional hopes that have been dashed, it's enough to make us look for the fastest and easiest way to cover our nakedness, to make ourselves feel less vulnerable. And when we are driven by our fear in such moments, God can seem to be nowhere to be found. All we see is the potential for harm around us as we rush to cover ourselves and cover our vulnerabilities and hide in the bushes. And so perhaps this story is a reminder for us to uncover ourselves before the divine, uncover ourselves before our community, and to be, figuratively, please, and to be made clearly aware of not only our humanity, and that our humanity is good, but to also be aware of the divine within our humanness. Yes, we live in an effed up world, and the more knowledge we gather about this world, the more effed up it seems to become. Big picture, it's global climate change, racism, misogyny. Interpersonally, it's broken or damaged relationships, money struggles, parenting woes. It can easily fill us with despair. And I don't think it's very easy to process and engage with this knowledge in a healthy manner without the assurance of divine compassion and the justice through the model of a community traveling that road with us. Buddhists use a term called equanimity. And equanimity is not a thought, it's not an emotion, but it is the steady and conscious realization that compassion and love are necessary to live in this world. In other words, equanimity is how we remain human in this effed up world with all of its suffering and all of its pain. And I would suggest that knowledge that we gain without equanimity, knowledge without divine compassion and love, knowledge apart from community, this is the mistake Adam and Eve made. Knowledge without equanimity is what makes us cover ourselves and hide from God in fear. Knowledge without equanimity brings anxiety and causes us to forget how to live within community. And knowledge without equanimity can cause us to forget how to remain human, how to remain soft and compassionate and loving in this world. We want to be able to acquire knowledge and face what is screwed up in this world, what is screwed up in our world. And we want to do this and also remain human. The problem is that it hurts. It hurts to pay attention. It hurts to care. It hurts to give a crap. Knowledge of good and evil without the divine spirit, without community, can cause us pain. It can cause us to run and hide and despair. And so I'm just going to move right into our questions for contemplation today and ask you a few things and open the floor, such as, how can the fear and anxiety we feel when we become aware of our own vulnerabilities be transformed? When we're confronted with more horrific news stories, how do we remain present and unafraid? When we're wrestling with the hard truths of the harms that have been done to us and that we have done to others, how do we not grow bitter and cynical? So, first one, how can the fear and anxiety we feel when we become aware of our own vulnerabilities be transformed? Action, yeah. Connecting with causes, which connects to community, right? Doing something with the community to address the world's ills. Yeah, absolutely, I would agree with that. Personal care, yeah, doing what we need to do to make sure that we are, I would just call it the best versions of ourselves that we can be. That might be therapy, that might be exercise, that whatever. So engaging in processes that address our own individual needs, for sure. Anyone else? How do we remain present and unafraid with the constant flood of news stories and trauma and pain that just seems to, I think it's always been there, but it feels like, and maybe it's not, maybe it's just me being hyper aware, but it feels like it's getting worse to me. I don't want to make declarations like that because it might be my perception, but it just feels like it's getting worse. How do we remain present and unafraid when it seems like everything around us wants us to be afraid?
Of this country and of the world,
Yes.
that we are aware of what's going on so that we can be instrumental in some way of making a change. But sometimes the news just gets overwhelming, and I think social media, I didn't have that kind of stuff when I was a kid. So I am more aware of what's going on because there are ways of accessing that information.
Yeah.
But there are times I think, time out. I was like, this is so distressing. In the back of my mind, say, I don't want to stick my head in the sand and say, oh, I just don't want to deal with it at all.
Yeah.
But I don't need to be watching it 24/7 or even more than 30 minutes. I'm going to get snippets here and there.
Creating healthy boundaries for yourself, not allowing yourself to get swept away. And there's a difference between creating boundaries for yourself of what you know you can handle versus just outright denial. There's a difference there. You have to gauge what you can. Some people can handle a lot for a long time, and then they need some downtime. They need a break. They need some de-stressing. Some people, limit the amount that is bringing in, and that gives them stamina to continue on. Catherine, a certain level of privilege. Oh yeah.
Well, just to go along what everybody else has said, being authentic, being your true self. And I really believe this church is outstanding, of embracing us, all of us, as individuals. And we are all trying, to do right things. And I do believe that. I also believe that for a healthy balance, you really need to take care of yourself and do things that are positive and fun.
Yes.
And it may sound superficial, but
Not at all.
you need to balance your life.
Yes.
And not be
Equanimity. Yes. That's not superficial at all. I think it's a strategy for survival. It's a strategy for success in justice work. I worked for 4 years for the Columbus Coalition for the Homeless, and nonprofit work can just it can just take you over, and you live it 24/7. And after 4 years, I was burnt out, and part of that was my fault because I did not set up healthy boundaries. I was in it. I lived in the neighborhood of the people that I worked with. It was, and I burnt myself out. So it's not at all incidental to make sure that you set up these structures within your life that allow you to recover, that allow, to have some fun, to feed into your life. And we can struggle with the privilege of that. And I understand that because, like Catherine said, there are people that we're working with that are a part, like working with the homeless. They live it 24/7 as well, right? But if we don't take care of ourselves, who is going to help them? Who is going to work for systematic change? Because it can be difficult when you're in the midst of it to do that. For some, right? Because you don't necessarily have the resources. You don't necessarily have the access to power that others might have. This is why allyship can be so important as well. Yeah.
All these issues that are just seem so hopeless, you see and meet all these wonderful people that are working to overcome that, and that brings you safe in the world again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that connects to building community as well, whether it's a church community, whether it's the community of people that you're working with. Community is so important. When we're getting, lambasted left and right by bad news, by crises and by trauma, community is so important. There have been times in my life where I've tried to go it alone, and I can make it for a certain period of time. I'm pretty determined and stubborn, and I can make it. But ultimately, without community, without people to lean on, without people to come up beside you and share your burdens, whether it directly affects them or not, can be so powerful and so valuable and incredibly healthy for people. A problem shared is a problem cut in half. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And I think the last question, I think the same answers apply. When something terrible happens to us, like as individuals, I'm not talking about world issues. I'm just talking about something bad that happens to us as an individual. Community, self-care, all these items that, a lot of people are just like, Jesus, take the wheel. Jesus is going to heal me. And our spirituality, our religion is important, but there's a reality to this world that we need others to get through. I had a family, when I went through my first divorce, I had a family member who I called to let them know what was happening and that I was hoping, for some support. And this individual's immediate response to me was, who is she? The allegation being that the divorce was happening because I cheated. And I struggled without that support, without that emotional support. And so when personal things happen to us, we still need that community. We still need that support, even if it's not a worldwide thing. If it's just us personally, we need it. And we need to set up those systems within our lives for self-care. So I think, the answer to all three of these questions are all very similar. Community, connection, self-care, building parameters of how much we are willing to absorb, and sharing that with those around us.
Just as I am, you welcome me with open arms. How can this be? My guilt is undone, my past is untethered. I leave it behind and run to divine love. There's no disappointment in your eyes. There's no shame, there is only There's nothing to hide, there's nothing to measure. 'Cause I am your child, that's all that matters. There's no disappointment in your eyes. There's no shame, there is only pride. Oh, I am loved, Jesus, I'm loved by you. I am loved, Jesus, I'm loved by you. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. I believe it, I receive it. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. I receive it, I believe it. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. I believe it, I receive it. You are changing everything. There's no disappointment in your eyes. There's no shame, there is only pride. Oh, I am loved, Jesus, I'm loved by you. There's no distance in your embrace. Over and over again you say, I am loved, Jesus, I'm loved by you. I am loved, Jesus, I'm loved by you. I am loved, Jesus, I'm loved by you.
Today's benediction is from the song The Love of God by Rich Mullins. There's a wideness in God's mercy I cannot find in my own. And he keeps his fire burning to melt this heart of stone. Keeps me aching with a yearning. Keeps me glad to have been caught in the reckless, raging fury that they call the love of God. Go then today with melted hearts, with equanimity, caught up in the reckless, raging fury that we do call the love of God. Amen. May it be so. Have a wonderful week.